What would you do if surrender and destruction became your only remaining choices? Imagine an enemy army approaching with overwhelming numbers and unstoppable momentum. Every road behind you has vanished, leaving only impossible decisions ahead. Advisors argue desperately while generals wait silently for a final command. The kingdom's future now rests upon the judgment of one exhausted ruler. One decision could save lives, yet destroy everything people hold dear. Before him stood a beautiful city built through generations of sacrifice. Markets thrived, families lived peacefully, and hope filled every street. Few realized their world stood dangerously close to complete annihilation. The king watched silently, carrying burdens no ordinary person could understand. Leadership often means choosing between terrible outcomes rather than ideal solutions. Tonight would become the most painful night of his entire life. Beyond the horizon, an enormous army advanced like a relentless storm. Villages had already fallen, and neighboring kingdoms were reduced to ashes. Every report arriving at the capital carried increasingly devastating news. The king knew victory through conventional warfare was becoming impossible. Resources were dwindling while enemy strength seemed limitless and terrifying. Yet surrender promised suffering that might last for generations afterward. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens continued their lives without understanding the danger. Children laughed while merchants traded beneath skies hiding approaching catastrophe. They trusted their king to protect everything they loved and cherished. Soon he would issue an order that changed history forever, an order so shocking many believed it came from madness itself. The command contained only two terrifying words: burn everything. The war council continued through the night without reaching any useful conclusion. Every advisor offered solutions, yet none addressed the kingdom's reality. Their enemy possessed superior numbers, supplies, experience, and momentum. Some argued surrender would spare countless innocent lives from destruction. Others demanded resistance, even if defeat appeared inevitable and brutal. Neither choice offered hope. Both carried unbearable consequences. Then another messenger entered the chamber, exhausted and covered with dust. His report silenced every voice gathered around the table immediately. Another border fortress had fallen during the previous night. The enemy now stood closer than anyone expected possible. Entire villages vanished beneath their advance, leaving only ruins behind. The kingdom's outer defenses were collapsing one after another rapidly. Later that night, the king sat alone without guards or advisors. Silence surrounded him more heavily than armor ever could. Maps covered the table, each showing fewer remaining options. Every road seemed to end with suffering for his people. Every strategy eventually led toward loss, death, or occupation. The burden felt impossible for any single human being to carry. Outside, rain tapped softly against stone walls and narrow windows. The kingdom slept while disaster moved steadily closer each passing hour. Few understood how fragile their future had already become. Standing on the balcony, the king stared across the city. Thousands of lights glowed peacefully beneath the darkness of night. He wondered how many would still exist 1 week later. Unable to sleep, the king left the castle and entered the city. He wore no crown, no royal robes, and no visible symbols. For one night, he wished to walk among his people quietly. In a small bakery, a man prepared bread for tomorrow's customers. The baker worked peacefully, unaware tomorrow might never arrive unchanged. Watching silently, the king felt guilt tightening around his heart. Further ahead, he saw a mother holding her sleeping child gently. The child dreamed peacefully, protected from the dangers approaching outside. That innocence felt almost unbearable to witness during such uncertainty. An old man sat quietly beneath the moon, enjoying the cool air. He smiled at strangers, never suspecting history was approaching rapidly. Every face reminded the king exactly what was truly at stake. Eventually, he arrived at the marketplace, standing silent beneath darkness. During daylight, it overflowed with life, noise, and endless activity. Tonight, it felt strangely empty, like a memory before disappearance. There, in complete solitude, the king finally allowed himself to cry. Not because he feared death, but because he feared his decision. Whatever he chose, someone would pay a terrible price. If he surrendered, the enemy would claim everything his people built. If he resisted conventionally, thousands would die in hopeless battle. And if he burned the city himself, history would condemn him forever. 3 choices stood before him, each more painful than the last. Yet dawn approached quickly, and time refused to wait. Before sunrise, the king finally made his devastating decision. As dawn arrived, the king summoned only his most trusted commanders. What they heard left several men speechless with disbelief and horror. The order was simple. The responsibility was unimaginable. Secret messages spread throughout the capital before ordinary citizens awakened. Loyal officers moved quickly, avoiding questions and unnecessary attention everywhere. Every minute mattered now more than ever before. Families were quietly directed toward hidden escape routes outside the city. Some obeyed immediately, sensing danger in the unusual urgency surrounding them. Others demanded explanations that soldiers were forbidden to provide. Meanwhile, warehouses were emptied and critical supplies removed from vulnerable locations. Food, weapons, medicine, and tools disappeared from storage buildings rapidly. The city was being hollowed out from within. Beneath the streets, hidden tunnels carried streams of frightened civilians outward. Mothers carried children while elderly citizens struggled through darkness patiently. Few understood why these measures were suddenly necessary. Strange rumors spread from neighborhood to neighborhood throughout the day. People sensed something enormous was happening behind closed doors. Yet nobody imagined the truth waiting ahead. Even experienced generals struggled to accept the king's strategy completely. Some questioned whether desperation had finally overwhelmed his judgment entirely. Others feared history would remember them as criminals and traitors. As evening approached, torches were positioned near key structures carefully. The city still stood proud, beautiful, and tragically unaware. By midnight, flames would begin rewriting the kingdom's destiny forever. Midnight arrived quietly, almost peacefully, before history changed forever that night. In the darkness, a single torch touched dry timber carefully. The first flame appeared, small enough to seem insignificant initially. Then another fire ignited across the city far away. Then another, and another, and another. Within minutes, flames emerged from multiple districts simultaneously. Citizens woke suddenly as smoke drifted through windows and narrow streets. Confusion spread faster than the fire itself across neighborhoods. Bells rang desperately while people rushed outside searching for answers. What they saw froze many in place with disbelief. Their city was burning from several directions at once. The sky glowed red as if dawn had arrived hours early. Flames climbed rooftops, consuming buildings that had stood for generations. Sparks drifted through the air like deadly stars descending from heaven. Entire streets vanished beneath walls of heat and smoke. Families watched helplessly as homes filled with memories disappeared forever. Merchants lost businesses while craftsmen lost workshops built through lifetimes. The destruction felt too deliberate to be accidental. Soldiers guided evacuations while refusing to answer desperate questions. Their silence only deepened fear and suspicion among the people. Rumors multiplied wildly as the inferno continued expanding relentlessly. Some blamed enemy spies hidden within the capital itself. Others feared divine punishment had fallen upon the kingdom. Soon, the horrifying truth would become impossible to hide. As panic intensified, citizens demanded answers from soldiers and officials immediately. Who started the fires, and why was nobody stopping them? The questions echoed through smoke-filled streets crowded with frightened families. Then the truth began spreading faster than the flames themselves. The fires were not the work of enemies or saboteurs. They were ordered by the king. Disbelief struck first, followed immediately by outrage and betrayal. People refused to accept such a shocking explanation as reality. Surely no ruler would destroy his own capital intentionally. Yet witnesses confirmed the order came directly from the throne. Anger erupted across the city like a second firestorm. Some called the king a coward. Others called him a monster. Many believed their ruler had lost his mind completely. The man once trusted as protector became the target of hatred. Every burning building seemed to strengthen the accusations against him. Yet the king never defended himself publicly or offered explanations. He stood alone on a distant hill overlooking the catastrophe. Tears filled his eyes as flames consumed everything he loved. This was not destruction inflicted by an enemy army. It was a sacrifice he had chosen with full awareness. Every collapsing roof felt like another wound carved into his soul. Yet he forced himself to watch without turning away. Because sometimes leadership demands carrying burdens nobody else can understand. By sunrise, the city would be almost entirely gone. At dawn, the invading army finally reached the capital's outer boundaries. They expected conquest, treasure, supplies, and a decisive strategic victory. Instead, they found smoke rising from endless fields of ruin. The magnificent capital had vanished almost entirely during a single night. Streets remained, but life had disappeared from them completely. Buildings stood blackened and broken beneath drifting clouds of ash. Enemy generals stared in disbelief at the destruction before them. This was not the victory they had carefully planned for. An occupied city could sustain an army, a dead city could not. They searched warehouses expecting food and military supplies. Every storage building had already been emptied completely. The kingdom had taken everything useful before abandoning the capital. Soon soldiers began experiencing shortages that commanders never anticipated. Hunger appeared where confidence had existed only days earlier. Frustration spread throughout the ranks with alarming speed. Officers argued over who failed to predict such a desperate strategy. Months of planning suddenly seemed worthless and incomplete. Their greatest prize had transformed into a costly burden overnight. Supply lines stretched dangerously while resources grew increasingly scarce. Every additional day weakened the invading army's position further. Momentum began slipping away from forces once considered unstoppable. From distant hills, the king observed the consequences quietly. The city was gone, but the enemy's strength was fading. For the first time, hope began returning to the kingdom. Weeks passed, and the invaders grew weaker with every difficult mile traveled. Hunger, exhaustion, and uncertainty slowly eroded their once overwhelming advantage. The unstoppable army no longer looked unstoppable at all. Sensing opportunity, the kingdom's forces began launching calculated counterattacks carefully. Small victories accumulated, gradually shifting momentum toward the defenders. For the first time, enemy commanders found themselves reacting rather than advancing. Battles erupted across valleys, roads, and strategic crossings throughout the region. The invaders fought fiercely, but their strength continued diminishing steadily. What seemed inevitable months earlier now appeared increasingly uncertain. Eventually, the enemy retreated, abandoning dreams of conquering the kingdom permanently. Their banners disappeared beyond the horizon, carrying defeat with them. Against all expectations, the kingdom had survived. Celebrations erupted across villages spared from occupation and destruction. Soldiers embraced one another, grateful simply to remain alive. The war was finally ending after years of suffering. Then the survivors began returning to their former capital slowly. They hoped to rebuild lives interrupted by sacrifice and conflict. Yet nothing prepared them for what awaited among the ruins. Entire neighborhoods existed only as foundations buried beneath ash and debris. Familiar streets felt strange, haunted by memories rather than people. Victory suddenly carried a bitterness nobody expected. The king walked through the destruction without escorts or ceremony. He had saved the kingdom yet felt no sense of triumph, because he understood the true cost of his decision completely. Years passed, and the kingdom slowly recovered from war and devastation. New homes replaced ruins, and markets once again filled with life. Children grew up never knowing the horrors their parents endured. On the surface, everything seemed to be healing beautifully. The kingdom survived exactly as the king had intended. Yet something unexpected began happening among the people quietly. As memories faded, details of the war became increasingly distant. The enemy was gone, no longer visible in everyday life, but the scars left by the fire remained everywhere. Citizens passed burned foundations and remembered their losses immediately. They remembered homes destroyed, businesses lost, and cherished possessions vanished. And gradually their anger found a new target. Not the invaders who threatened the kingdom from beyond the borders. Not the war that forced impossible choices upon everyone involved. They blamed the man who gave the order. The king who burned the city became easier to remember. His decision was visible. The enemy's threat was now only memory. Slowly, public opinion shifted in ways nobody expected. The king was no longer celebrated as the kingdom's savior. Many began describing him as cruel, reckless, even heartless. The very sacrifice that saved the nation became evidence against him. Alone in his palace, the aging ruler watched this transformation silently. He never argued, defended himself, or demanded gratitude from anyone. Perhaps he knew this outcome was inevitable from the beginning. In old age, the king often walked through the rebuilt capital alone. Everywhere he looked, life flourished because the kingdom had survived. Children played freely beneath skies no longer darkened by war. Merchants prospered, families grew, and peace finally returned permanently. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt strangely empty. The people enjoyed the future he sacrificed everything to protect. Yet few remembered why such sacrifices had become necessary. The city stood because it had once been destroyed deliberately. That contradiction proved difficult for many people to accept. They preferred a simpler story with clear heroes and villains. Unfortunately, reality rarely grants such comforting simplicity. Histories written afterward often focused on the burning itself. The reasons behind the fire slowly faded into the background. Future generations inherited conclusions without understanding the impossible circumstances involved. They heard about a king who burned his own city. Few paused long enough to ask what alternatives actually existed. Fewer still understood the price he personally paid afterward. Here lies the story's final and most painful twist. Had he refused to burn the city, the kingdom might have vanished. Had the kingdom vanished, nobody would remain to judge his decision. By saving his people, he ensured they could someday condemn him. The kingdom survived because of him, yet his reputation did not. Sometimes the greatest sacrifice is surrendering the chance to be remembered kindly.